Okay, I'm very happy to be able to introduce to you Rémi Vuillemin. He's a maître de conférence, if I pronounce that right, and associate professor at the University of Strasbourg. And his research bears on early modern English poetry, and more particularly on the sonnet, its history, its reception, and how it has been theorized, or is theorized. His interests also include book history, early modern intercultural relationships, and recent history. His recent published works include edited collections about framing in literature and the visual arts, and forthcoming essays on the reception and translation of Petrarch in England, and Thomas Watson's edition of Petrarch's Notes and Queries, Laure Solius in Umbra, explicating Petrarch and Thomas Watson's Hecatompathia, in Belle, Marie Alice, Ricardo Raimondo, e Francesco Venturi, translating Petrarch in Early Modern Britain, Canzonieri and Trionfi. And his current projects examines the notion of sonnet sequence and investigates the shaping of early modern lyric collections. And today he's going to talk about the dark backwork and Aysm of time, remembering Shakespeare and Margret Atwood's Hag-Seed. We're very happy to have you here. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Christina. I'd like to thank EJ again and Wolfgang for the organization of the cycle of lecture and this lecture in particular. As you've just heard, I'm sort of straying quite far from my area of expertise. I don't know that much about Canadian literature, to be perfectly honest. So if some of you, it's likely that quite a few of you are more knowledgeable than I am about Canadian literature, and feel free to bring in some perspective to what I said. Is the sound okay? Yes? Okay. So Margaret Atwood's Hag-Seed is, of course, a rewriting of Shakespeare's The Tempest. And as I'll explain in a few minutes, it was written in a commemorative context. The Tempest has long been seen as one of Shakespeare's last plays. It was one of Shakespeare's last plays, but also as his farewell to the stage, which is perhaps a little more doubtful. But Atwood herself alludes to that in a 2017 interview about Hag-Seed. And we should bear in mind that it was written quite late in Atwood's career as well. I take it you all have some awareness, at least, of the Tempest and the plot of the Tempest. To put things very plainly, historically, there have been two, let's say, strands of reception of the Tempest. That's, of course, it's more complicated than that, but roughly we could say that in the 19th and 20th century were dominated by a sort of romantic vision of the Tempest as a play of wonders, magic, and music. And more recently, let's say for the past 50 years or so, the Tempest has been linked to, has been analyzed in terms of post-colonial studies, of critical race studies, and as a sort of Shakespearean investigation of early colonialism in the New World, but also in Ireland, depending on interpretations. Just to give you an example of how the play has been received not just in academia but also by writers. French writer from the French West Indies, Aimé Césaire, wrote a play called Une tempête, not the tempest, but a tempest. And the title itself shows how Césaire is rejecting the idea that there's just one tempest, the tempest, a tempest made representative of, let's say, all tempests there might be in the world, to choose to write a tempest, just one possible tempest among many. So by doing that, Aimé Césaire points out, points to the Tempest as a sort of trace of Western colonial history, of, let's say, a sort of abstract universalism of the West to, on the contrary, write a particular Tempest, one that does not purport to be valid for everyone. So the Tempest can be seen and has been seen as, we could say, a trace of Western colonial history, a trace might both reveal history, a part of history, but might also conceal it, because it's sort of, that history is sort of hidden behind it, if you like. So today, at least in academia, but arguably elsewhere too, the Tempest plays a role in the negotiation of a past history of slavery and racism. Now, this is Hag-Seed, and what seems quite clear is that Hag-Seed was partly inspired from Atwood's own education in Shakespeare, and she was lucky to follow the courses of Northrop Frye, so a prominent Canadian Shakespearean scholar at the University of Toronto in the 60s. Northrop Frye's approach to the Tempest predates this strand of criticism of this vision of the play as discussing or encapsulating issues related to colonialism. We will see that in Atwood's book, this political dimension is not really ignored, but is not necessarily prominent either. And as Douglas Lanier states, this play really shows a belief in the redemptive power of this novel, the redemptive power of Shakespeare, and I guess of literature in general. Shakespeare's text is commemorated in this novel. Shakespeare's The Tempest is commemorated, but it is also used, arguably, to commemorate something else, and it's perhaps a way for Atwood also to have a look at her own writing. So there's a strong belief in something like a universal value of Shakespeare's works, not really by denying the past, but rather by a belief that Shakespeare can be appropriated by various ends, notably in situations of cultural and political domination. I should perhaps provide some context first to understand what Hag-Seed is about and how it came to be written. So it was published in 2016, and it belongs to a series of books published under the imprint Hogarth Shakespeare. In each of those books, you find that initial page with the description of the imprint. So I thought we could start by just having a look at it and see how it's presented, how it's introduced. The world's favorite playwright, today's best-loved novelist, timeless stories retold. Of course, the point here is to sell books, so that's the kind of phrasing you use for that. But there's a strong insistence on Shakespeare's status. It's really canonical Shakespeare, the world's favorite playwright, with this idea of being universal. For more than 400 years, we're told afterwards, this collection was launched in 2014, that is on the 450th anniversary of Shakespeare's birth, and 2016, the year Hag-Seed was published, was the 500th anniversary of Shakespeare's death, so there were a number of celebrations across the world. of those two events. We also get here the idea that Shakespeare is for everyone, okay? So Shakespeare's works have been performed, read and loved throughout the world, and they've been reinterpreted for each new generation, so it works for all generations, and it works in all kinds of forms as well. Then we get the introduction of the Hogarth Press, and this presentation introduces the idea of a continuity between the Hogarth Shakespeare and the initial Hogarth Press, which was founded by Virginia and Leonard Woolf in 1917 initially. So I'm not going to tell you the whole history of the Hogarth Press, but basically it was revived at that time in the 2010s. So there's the notion here of a continuity between, if you like, the legacy. There's the legacy of Shakespeare, but there's also the legacy of Virginia Woolf, which is interesting because there's this idea of Shakespeare for everyone. Arguably, Virginia Woolf is perhaps not the writer in the English canon that's the easiest to read. It's very, particularly sophisticated, experimental, etc. But there's this idea of, depicting a sort of continuity here. I think there's also this idea of associating tradition, Shakespeare, and modernity, Virginia Woolf, as the first, of course, a modernist writer, and one of the most acclaimed ones as well. It is also, we're told, a mission. So it was a mission for Virginia and Leonard Woolf to publish the best writing of the age. So this, suggests that perhaps publishing those books is a mission as well. We get the list of the writers of those, rewritings of Shakespeare in alphabetical order. They're all very successful authors. Okay, so here you can see also how the series is oriented. Atwood, of course, is very well known. You probably knew her first because of The Handmaid's Tale. The series had not been released yet at that point, but it was about to be released. And of course, she already had an impressive list of awards for earlier works, including The Handmaid's Tale. Tracy Chevalier, known for her Girl with a Pearl Earring, 1999, which was translated into nearly 40 languages, sold more than 5 million copies, was adapted into a film in 2003, and that film itself received awards. Gillian Flynn wrote 3 novels that were adapted into series of films. You might know the Gone Girl film, for example. Her adaptation of Hamlet was never published, actually. It's the only one in these books that was never published. The series was discontinued. Howard Jacobson, British author, won the Man Booker Prize for The Finkler Question 2010. He was called the English Philip Roth. Okay, to give you an idea of his status, though he preferred to call himself the Jewish Jane Austen, but that's another thing. Joe Nesbo, you might know him, the author of crime novels. Okay, so part of this fashion for northern Scandinavian crime fiction, it only made sense for him to rewrite Macbeth, and his rewriting is actually a thriller. It's proper crime fiction, which works quite well with Macbeth. Edward St. Aubyn, with the character of Patrick Melrose, very well known, adapted into films. His Mother's Milk was nominated for the Booker Prize. Anne Tyler, consecrated writer as well, who got the Pulitzer Prize in 1989. Janet Winterson, I don't know if I need to introduce her. You might be aware, for example, of oranges are not the only fruit. So, I mean, they're all, she's quite a star as well. So a very impressive cast of writers. With something in common between perhaps Janet Winterson and Margret Atwood in particular, this reputation of perhaps not quite activist writers, but of taking particular stances, especially in terms of gender and feminism. Right, so you can see that this was a commemorative venture, one that was also meant to be quite impressive in terms of the writers that were chosen. I'll briefly summarize, unless everybody has read Hag-Seed, but it's probably not the case. Okay, so I briefly summarize, no problem at all. I briefly summarize the plot, and you'll see very quickly that you'll be reminded probably of Shakespeare's The Tempest. So the novel is centered on Felix Phillips, a particularly brilliant stage director, and the head of a major theatre festival called Mukeshiweg. I think I wrote it there, yes. Felix is focused on the artistic dimension of his job and not very much on the political and financial aspects, which he lets his friend Anthony Price, manage. Of course, Anthony is reminiscent of Antonio in The Tempest, so he will be betrayed by him. So we're given Felix's background. He married quite late. His wife died of an infection right after the birth of their daughter, Miranda, same name as in The Tempest. At which point Felix sort of made do and tried to devote the time he had, that is, not much time, to his daughter. But 3 years later, his daughter dies of meningitis. Felix is devastated, and the only way he finds to cope with his loss is to devise a particularly ambitious staging of The Tempest. Okay, so you see the number of levels we have already. This is a rewriting of The Tempest, but there's also a performance of The Tempest within it. First an aborted performance, and then an actual one, as I'm going to explain. So before Felix can complete his work and actually perform his work on Shakespeare's The Tempest, he is voted out of his responsibilities as artistic director of Mukeshiweg Festival by the board, and the board uses his grief as a pretext. Tony takes over, so his friend takes over, as suggested by politician Minister Sal O'Nally. I'm mentioning him because we'll hear of him later. Felix decides to disappear from Mukeshiweg altogether, settles in an isolated place, which he rents under the name Duke. Of course, Prospero is a duke in The Tempest. So he has this double identity, Felix and Mr. Duke. He lives on his savings, reads books from the local library, especially fairy tales, and starts thinking about a revenge, but has no idea how to carry it out. It starts spying on Tony and Sal O'Nally on the internet, looking for any information he can find about them. Little by little, he also develops the idea that his daughter, Miranda, who has died at that point, is with him at all time. She becomes a sort of ghostly presence that haunts him all along the novel. At the same time, he sort of seems to be realizing that, the madness of believing that Miranda is around, and decides he needs to socialize to be back in the real world, and he takes a job as a teacher in a program of literacy for convicts in a prison called Fletcher County Correctional Institute. So Fletcher is an early modern dramatist, or was an early modern dramatist. So Felix is recruited by a local politician who recognizes him to be Felix Phillips, the former director of Mekeshiweg. She gives him the job and accepts his wish to remain known just as Mr. Duke, so not to reveal his true identity. Felix so educates, teaches in the prison, and he also stages plays with the prisoners. And those plays work really well with the inmates. After a few years, the opportunity has dreamed of presents itself. Sal O'Nally, now Justice Minister, and Tony, now Heritage Minister, will come to the prison to see the play of the convicts. Felix decides to take his revenge through a staging of The Tempest with the convicts. Okay. So all I've just explained basically constitutes the first part of the book, out of 5 parts, a prologue, and an epilogue. So stand reassured, I'm not going to summarize the rest, okay? I'll stop there for the summary, but basically the rest is about how Felix and the actors get ready, how they trick Sal and Tony, filming them in compromising circumstances, which then gives Felix leverage to blackmail them into getting back his former position as artistic director of Mekeshiweg Festival. Okay? Right. Now, just a little more background about Canadian Shakespeare and the Stratford Shakespeare Festival. First, a few pieces of information, very, very short, very basic background about how Shakespeare began to be acted in Canada. In the 19th century, foreign actors flooded to Canada to play Shakespeare, and they developed a tradition of playing Shakespeare's plays, which very much stood against native cultural traditions, and was subsequently seen as part of cultural dominance, British cultural dominance in particular. Amateur theatre, in particular, long had British elitist associations in the Canadian context. So that's, just a few, pieces of information here and there. Of course, especially from the 1940s onwards, also a scholarly tradition also developed with names of prominent Shakespearean scholars whose fame went far beyond the borders of Canada. People like George Wilson Knight or indeed Northrop Frye. In 1953, the Stratford Shakespeare Festival was created. So Stratford is the name of a city in Ontario. And it is this city and this festival that Atwood had in mind when she invented Mekeshiweg. Now, this in itself is interesting. Stratford, Ontario. Okay, Stratford is, of course, the name of Shakespeare's birthplace in England. So Atwood chooses the word Mekeshiweg, which, according to her, is a word for fox in an indigenous Canadian language. So she replaces the place name that comes from, the colonizer, basically England, by a local indigenous name. So the creation of the Stratford Shakespeare Festival in 1953 was a major event for Canadian Shakespeare, and according to scholars like Bryden, it quickly became the largest classical theatre in North America. By classical, he means a theatre playing canonical authors. It developed, one could say, in two ways. There was, on the one hand, the development of a, let's say, perhaps not yet. Okay, distinctly Canadian way of producing Shakespeare, which was even called by certain scholars the reverse colonialism of Stratford's influence. Okay, so for example, some actors, Canadian actors, built their reputation by participating in this festival, and then they were hired in major British companies, for example. Part of this tradition was also Canadian fascination with revisionist versions of Shakespeare. So a way of revisiting the plays in provocative or experimental ways. So it started in 1953. By the 1970s, the status of the festival was perhaps a little bit more uncertain. The 1970s was the time of the development of a cultural movement for development of Canadian identity, especially among writers and culture at large. And Stratford and the Shakespeare Festival was seen as, by certain people, as representing Canada's colonial dependence on the former colonizer. It was also seen by certain people as a commercial consumerist venture. And let's say on the other side, some people argued that this theatre, the festival, was very useful for people to assimilate, Canadian people to assimilate those canonical literary works, to then be able to develop a national style. It was also the form of the productions themselves that were criticized. Some people saw the productions as closer to musicals, to Hollywood-like productions. The 70s is also the moment when, Hollywood becomes what it is now. The Globe and Mail theatre critic Kate Taylor even attacked Stratford's Disney-like productions of Shakespeare with a focus on spectacle and speed rather than plot or character or language. Right, so this gives you Disney-like. Here we go. So this gives you a general background, which also corresponds to, well, especially the last part here, to what Margret Atwood knew as she was beginning to be a writer. The beginning of her writing career was in the 60s and 70s, so it really was at that time, and the Felix is called Felix. Felix might stand for Robert Lepage, who was in charge of that festival at the time in the early 1970s. Now, I'd like to tell you a bit more about the reflexivity in this novel. Most of the novel is not about the festival. The festival, if we think of The Tempest, sort of stands for Milan, the dukedom of Milan, what Prospero lost. Similarly, Felix lost his... Yes? Sorry, do you have a... No, sorry, I thought you had a question. Most of the novel is about staging Shakespeare in a prison. In other words, in an enclosed space that somewhat echoes the space of the performance. So I'd like to focus a little on those frames because they participate in, of course, the connection to the original play, the way this, of course, introduces reflexivity. This contributes to the mise en abîme as well within the book. A few words first about the title. So the full title is Hag-Seed, the Tempest Retold, which is actually a bit, could mean different things. Could mean that the novel itself is a retelling of the Tempest, which it is. It could be that the novel is about someone retelling the Tempests, which in a way the novel is as well. And the title itself conveys the possibility of an embedded structure, a narrative within the novel, or the play within the novel. The term Hag-Seed itself refers to Caliban. It reflects the fact that Hag-Seed is in the title, so in the words Caliban is in the title, reflects the focus on the character of Caliban in the interpretations of the Tempest in the last 50 years. So since the 1970s, roughly, while Prospero in those interpretations tends to be seen as the figure of the colonizer, Caliban is seen as the enslaved native. So the character of Caliban has sort of become possibly the main character in the Tempest, one could say, in the interpretations of the last 50 years. So Atwood does rely on those interpretations to a certain extent, even though she does not develop them that much. Now, of course, those borders, those frames, have to do with entrapment, with enclosing, if you like, the characters. The Tempest takes place on an island, so an enclosed space, arguably. Ariel and Caliban are prisoners. Caliban, to a large extent, could be said to be the prisoner of Prospero. And actually, in Atwood's novel, Felix challenges his actors, so the convicts, to make a list of all the prisons they can find in the text of the Tempest. And here is the results of their research. Sorry. Okay, so you have here eight prisons or 8 situations of entrapment, of imprisonment. And as you can see here, in most cases, the Prospero is the main jailer here, closely followed by Antonio and Alonso. But we have the name of Prospero in 3 cases. So those are the prisoners' interpretations, or the prisoners' understanding of the prisons in the Tempest. So it also goes to show how closely the convicts identify with the figure of Caliban and see Prospero as the jailer. At the end, Felix will add one more jail, the play itself, from which Prospero needs to be freed at the end of the Tempest. The last 3 words of the play are famously Prospero's "set me free," asking the audience to set him free. So here, the power relationships are also explained in terms of entrapment, and we see quite clearly how the convicts project also their own experience on their reading of the Tempest. In the novel, the novel of course takes place, mostly in a prison. The characters are locked also, so the 2 characters that Felix has his revenge upon are locked during the play within the play. It's actually the play within the play within the novel. It's the play within the play in the Tempest. Okay, so the play within the novel. And Felix himself is secluded in his shack, an equivalent of Prospero's cell. And at a more metaphorical level, the prisoners are locked within themselves, with Shakespeare's text as a means actually to open them to something else. And perhaps at the level of the novel as a whole, Felix is also locked with himself, locked in a sort of denial of his daughter's death. The novel is largely about Felix's mourning process. One example of an allusion to entrapment in the novel, it's confusing, a reference to Richard Lovelace's 12th Year from Prison, 17th century poem. Quoting this poem, especially this extract, is actually a bit of a cliche, but it's still interesting from our perspective, since it was also composed in an actual prison, the Gatehouse prison in London, where Lovelace was imprisoned in 1642. So this quote hints that Felix quotes Lovelace. It hints at Felix's self-imposed barriers, but it also refers to his teaching and acting as a stage director in a prison. And of course, here you have this sense of breaking from entrapment. Felix has to go to a prison to set himself free. Okay. And as we'll see, not just himself. This sense of entrapment is, we could say, replicated on the level of form with the multiple frames of the novel. So I've tried to represent it, visually. So it's not very beautiful, but I think it's clear, or hopefully it is. Okay, I think it helps you see the level of, embedding that goes on in the play. Of course, you're probably aware that the play within the play is often considered a Shakespearean device. It's not specific to Shakespeare, but you find so many plays within the play in Shakespeare, in Hamlet, Midsummer Night's Dream, The Taming of the Shrew, Love's Labour's Lost, and so on, and The Tempest, of course, not counting a number of passages that are not strictly speaking plays within the play, but are embedded structures with strong metadramatic value, the cliff scene in King Lear, Mark Antony's speech in Julius Caesar, for instance. So the scene of the mask in Act 5, scene 1 of The Tempest, can be seen as one of those embedded passages. Margaret Atwood has used such devices in other works as well. For example, in The Blind Assassin, the first book that got the Booker Prize, the first of Atwood's, the character of Iris Chase writes a novel, and we get bits of the novel interspersed within it. In that case, the embedding is used to delineate different levels of fiction. Iris Chase's story is fiction to the reader. The embedded story is fiction both to the characters of the novel and to the reader. So fiction, if you like, twice removed, as it were. But as I said, in The Blind Assassin, those passages, this novel within the novel is interspersed within the main, here and there, if you like, in the main narrative. Here, on the contrary, we have a framing effect, and I think here you can see it clearly. Such an effect is achieved at the end of The Handmaid's Tale, with the final historical notes on The Handmaid's Tale that you get at the end, a chapter that is both, if you like, within and without the book, and which transforms June Osborne's narrative into a historical document. Hag-Seed combines temporal and fictional embedding to an unprecedented degree in Atwood's work. So as you can see, I've counted 6 different levels here. So the first level is structured by an initial prologue and a final epilogue, so here in yellow. Those contain a second structure, the main plot, so in orange here. So Felix's story, chapters 1 to 47, which also includes a prologue and an epilogue. Then you get the embedded plot, that is the production of The Tempest at Fletcher Correctional, which has a prologue as well. The rehearsal of the play in parts 2 and 3, and an epilogue, part 5, the cast party. The fourth level, so here in blue, is the account of the performance of the play. The play itself is level 5, in purple here, with a fourth embedded prologue. And the fifth level, okay, I've lost count, sorry. No, the third embedded prologue, then the fifth level here, the play itself, and finally, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, yes, Prospero's, the play within the play. The play within the play within the novel, okay, if you're following. Okay, so, this is extremely, quite an impressive level of embedding here. Now, the question is, what for, of course? Hag-Seed can be read as a sort of meta-literary offering, giving keys to read the then current state of Atwood's writing. And probably its attempts, a sort of conciliation, if you like, an attempt to reconcile combativeness in the face of the world's ills and a deeply needed sense of consolation. And this relies precisely on a reinterpretation and rewriting of the past, so that Shakespeare's play is used as a tool for remembrance, or for the conjuring up and combining of a multiplicity of memories, some personal, some collective. Here we have a depiction of Felix's decision to stage The Tempest as a sort of consolation for the loss of his daughter. He would create a fit setting for this reborn Miranda he was willing into being. So, trying to give a second life to Miranda. Again, Felix is Atwood's version of Shakespeare's Prospero, and Miranda a substitute for Shakespeare's Miranda. Who is replaced by another, who is also played later in the novel by another Miranda, the actress who plays the role of Miranda in the prison, in a process of mise en abîme that is characteristic both of the novel and of Shakespeare's play. Now, I'd like to focus on the end of this sentence. He would create, or on the sentence as a whole even, he would create a fit setting for this reborn Miranda he was willing into being. While the beginning of the sentence is quite clearly some sort of free indirect speech, the narratological status of its end is less clear. It could be Felix telling himself that he is willing Miranda into being, or the narrators comment upon Felix's enterprise. The use of the verb will is likely an allusion to Will Shakespeare, William Shakespeare, which is a pun that you find in some sonnets by Shakespeare, for example. The use of the verb will can be ascribed to Felix, a stage director whose job it is to give some substance, to things, to airy nothing, a local habitation, and a name, to quote A Midsummer Night's Dream. Or to, in this case, the narrative voice, who's building a new Tempest, using the Shakespearean source as material and energy for a new literary creation. This stresses the parallel statuses of the exuberant fictional Shakespearean stage director and the author herself, who has had to build an entire commissioned novel on the basis of Shakespeare's play. In an interview for the American Libraries magazine, published in 2016, Margret Atwood, on being asked why she chose to rewrite The Tempest rather than another Shakespearean play, replied what you can see here. I've written about The Tempest before, so that was in a book on writing, Negotiating with the Dead. One of the chapters is about Prospero and Mephistopheles. The play is about magical artifacts and good or bad, etc. The Tempest has never been cut and dried to me. I have many different interpretations of it, every one of them supported by the text, although they are so different. So the chapter she alludes to is chapter 4 in Negotiating with the Dead, in which, amongst other issues, Atwood deals with the responsibilities of the writer. So here the figure of the magician is equated with the figure of the writer, a sort of ambiguous trickster, whose actions have moral repercussions, not always the ones intended, whether one wants it or not. Finally, this authorial presence behind the narrator, to come back to this, was willing into being. This authorial presence behind the narrator can be heard in the way this sentence rewrites a passage from Atwood's own The Handmaid's Tale, in which the narrator, June Osborne, says about her prospective reader, "I will you into being, I write, therefore you are." So it seems quite clear that Hag-Seed has been an opportunity for Atwood to reflect upon her craft, and that Felix is to a certain extent only a doppelganger of Atwood, the writer. You found that idea also in the one of the articles I recommended you to read for this lecture. So the sheer level of intricacy of the issues raised by this extract is representative of the fact that Hag-Seed is actually the result of a rather traditional, one might say, disenchanted humanist use of the Shakespearean text. So in one of the first scholarly assessments of the Hogarth Shakespeare series, Douglas Lanier has stated that Hag-Seed emphasizes the redemptive nature of the Shakespearean text, even more so than the other books in the Hogarth Shakespeare series. And for him, Atwood seeks to take some distance from the interpretation of The Tempest as proto-colonial discourse, actually. Perhaps it was something that, perhaps she thought that, the readership expected that and decided to go against those expectations. But according to Lanier, the effect is to purge Shakespeare's narrative of its ideologically retrograde aspects and thereby make it unproblematically, triumphantly redemptive in the telling. And according to Lanier, this has to do with the very nature of the project of the Hogarth Shakespeare, by asking authors to rewrite Shakespeare in that kind of way, in this context of commemoration. This was likely to happen, if you like. However, it's also, yes, I should also add that the redemptive vision of Shakespeare, as analyzed by Lanier, also corresponds to, if you like, the target readership of the Hogarth Press, which was mostly addressed to an upper middle class audience of educated professionals, and many characters in the books actually reflect that. But Lanier also states that Atwood's venture is one of the more complex ones in the series, along with Jacobson's rewriting of The Merchant of Venice, because Jacobson had to deal, one of the reasons being that Jacobson had to deal with the tricky questions of the anti-Semitism in The Merchant of Venice in his rewriting. The complexity in Atwood, I think, has to do with our creative use of Shakespearean features and writing modes generally seen as Shakespearean. So, for example, the device of the play within the play of embedding is one of those things that are called Shakespearean, even though Shakespeare is, of course, not the only writer doing that. And she uses that she used the Shakespearean text, if you like, as a source, but also as a haunting presence that allows her to sort of confront a literary and historical past, but perhaps in a quite an indirect way, and still, benefit from the sort of energizing power of the original text. In other words, by haunting the text, the spectre of Shakespeare provides the means for working through some traumas of the present while leaving other problems unsolved. So the rewriting of Shakespeare, The Tempest, becomes, if you like, a commentary upon what literature can do, but also upon perhaps what it cannot achieve, separating, if you like, the wheat from the chaff. Hag-Seed being a rewriting of The Tempest, it's of course no surprise that echoes from the play should be found in the text, but none of the other books in the Hogarth Shakespeare series makes a comparably ubiquitous use of the source text. Chapter titles in Hag-Seed are extracted from The Tempest, they're quotes from The Tempest, but there are also allusions to other plays such as King Lear, Macbeth, or A Midsummer Night's Dream. And in several instances, those allusions could also be perceived by Atwood's readers as allusions to her own previous allusions to these plays. So, for example, on page 15, Felix thinks about the lost daughters in Shakespeare's plays, from Lavinia, Titus Andronicus, to Marina in Pericles, through Juliet, Cordelia, and Perdita in The Winter's Tale, in a sort of gradation that goes from the daughters whose fate is most gruesome, Lavinia, to the ones that are found again, Perdita, Marina. And from Shakespeare's most bloody tragedy, Titus Andronicus, to the romances that he wrote at the end of his career as a dramatist, and that convey this sense of reconciliation and of peace, if you like. By insisting on the loss of the daughter, Atwood also provides an inverted reflection of a type of plot that's been identified by Barbara Estrin as fundamental in recent rewritings of Shakespeare, the foundling plot. 3 Shakespearean daughters' names are also used in Atwood's Cat's Eye, 1988. So Cordelia, the main character's childhood friend, and her 2 elder sisters, Miranda and Perdita. The 3 of them in that book form a trio reminiscent of the Weird Sisters, especially as the novel repeatedly alludes to Macbeth. So the systems of, those are just a few glimpses of the systems of echoes. In the interview on CBC Atwood gave in 2017, so the one I mentioned earlier, so it was basically 1 year after the release of Hag-Seed and shortly after the broadcasting of the first episode of the Handmaid's Tale series, Atwood was asked to discuss her rewriting of The Tempest, and she stated that in his later plays, Shakespeare revisits some of his early themes and make things end well. I think Atwood might have taken the opportunity of Hag-Seed to do the same, to think back of some of her earlier work as well. Yes, one example of how the tempest is used before. In this extract from The Blind Assassin, the narrator's parents acted in a bowdlerized version of Shakespeare's play. So this gives a good example of how the historical background and its connections to colonialism have been erased. This is the case in this mention of the tempest. And here Atwood is interestingly careful to emphasize how both sexuality and the question of colonialism and the character of Caliban were repressed in that version. And this is in a novel, again, in which the embedded plot has to do with the past, how the past is repressed. I'll now take a few more examples from one work in particular, Surfacing, 1972. It was an important novel in her career. That's perhaps the novel that established her as a specifically Canadian writer interested in issues of cultural self-definition. So published in 1972. And it has common points with Hag-Seed, both in terms of similarities and of reversals. It takes place on an island. The plot is about a daughter looking for her lost father. In Hag-Seed, we've got a father coming to terms with the passing away of his daughter. But there's also a lost child in Surfacing, so spoiler alert if some of you have not read it and wish to read it, in the sense that one of the problems the narrator faces is to come to terms with having had an abortion, and she sort of repressed that memory. There's this question of lying to oneself. So the main character in Surfacing tells us she was married and divorced and then abandoned her child while she actually had an affair and an abortion. And we are told, of course, she tells her friends and herself these same lies because she comes for a while to believe it. So there's also a focus in the necessity of lies. Lies, of course, and illusion are not very far one from the other. One can think, I don't know if some of you have read or seen the series Alias Grace, which is about the little white lies one needs to use. So there's this idea of the narrator and the writer as well as a trickster. More generally, questions of having trouble connecting with the past, and the role of the supernatural with the end of Surfacing, in which the main character seems to be undergoing a sort of transformation into an animal and back into a human being. And it seems difficult to know if this is just going on in her head or if it's something that, if the novel turned into a sort of fantastic novel. In Hag-Seed, things are simpler than that, but Miranda is a ghost, even if it seems quite clear that this ghost is an effect of trauma, which can be, of course, reminiscent of Shakespearean ghosts as well. Right, so to conclude this part, in Surfacing, the past, the individual and the collective past resurfaces. It's a sort of return of the personal and the colonial repressed, if you like, which articulates issues of gender and national identity. Conversely, Hag-Seed is about working through and using literature to do that. So political questions are not really completely left aside, but it's a far less overtly political novel than Surfacing. Or at least it's much more, let's say, structurally about the politics of writing than explicitly, thematically about specific issues. I can still give you a brief glimpse of some of the questions that are discussed or at least, broached in one way or another in the novel. So, of course, there's a degree of social comment, especially in Felix's attitude. So and of course, a lot of that is focused on the writer, the figure of the, so here not the writer, the stage director, but Prospero's alter ego and possibly Atwood's alter ego. The inmates, the way they define themselves, also, well, sympathizing with Caliban, but also, at least at the beginning, in contrast to Felix. The cast, also there's a passage with the cast. We've got the list of the cast, which is phrased in a way that is reminiscent of the status of actors in Shakespeare's time as, low lives. It's a bit exaggerated because there were not low lives in terms of financial resources, at least in Shakespeare's company, but they had a low social status indeed. The questions of gender and homosexuality are discussed, sometimes in slightly problematic way. The inmates, there's a sort of running joke with the inmates who are going to participate in the play, but there's no way they're going to sing one of the songs which goes, where the bee sucks, there suck I, etc. So they don't want to sing it because, I quote them, it's gay. Okay, so it's a sort of running joke in the novel. And perhaps more clearly, money and power, with, of course, this question of Felix / Prospero being in deep studies, being focused on drama, and not interested in the in the particulars, with this idea that you despise money at your own risks. I quote the novel: "Noble people do not do things for the money; they simply have money, and that's what allows them to be noble." So, by contrast, not having the money poses a number of problems. So Atwood's perspective is clearly, and from an ideological standpoint, is clearly not a radical one. It tries to record some, social phenomena of domination, discrimination, prejudice, but also shows characters working together for a common goal. So there's the idea of a degree, at least, of consensus. And I must say it is quite consistent with the perspective of Shakespeare's romances that have been seen again as plays of reconciliation. So it is consistent with, the commission. I'd like perhaps to finish that last part, to focus on one aspect of The Tempest that is central to the play, that is music, just by giving a few examples, and one in particular, to show perhaps that, the social comment, there is real social comment in the play. I don't want to give you the impression that it's just that it does not give perhaps what you expect from Atwood. So music is one central dimension of The Tempest. So it's exploited in Hag-Seed, of course. So you find the songs that are in The Tempest, in the inmates play some of these songs. So you have references to music that are familiar to 21st century readers, references to Elizabethan songs, the songs in The Tempest. Caliban's song, rather unsurprisingly, becomes a rap song. I'd like to give you one other example, which I think is quite interesting. It's a mention of Ride the Lightning, a song by the heavy metal band Metallica, which is also the title of the second album, and which is used by Felix's Ariel, the inmate 8 Hands, to wake up the members of the audience of his Tempest who have been sedated. I don't know if you... No, it's not here, sorry. So So basically, they get this very, very loud heavy metal music. They've been sedated. They're in a bit of a state, and of course, they're not feeling very well. So here we've got the choice of a song by a heavy metal band, a genre that is generally, perceived as projecting a sort of stereotypically masculine, not to say masculinist identity, which might be yet another way of underlining these sort of ideological limitations of the inmates in terms of gender. The title of the song, of course, Ride the Lightning, makes sense in a rewriting of The Tempest, but it's also relevant on several other levels. The topic of the lyrics of the song is the electric chair. We're talking about a play that's taking place in a prison, okay? So that might be a grim reminder that, just the other side of the border, that's how some of the inmates might end up on the electric chair. It is also well known that songs by Metallica were, it was an infamous, it was known that it was played, songs by Metallica were played by suspected terrorists at Guantanamo after the Guantanamo prison after 9/11. So, under the Bush administration. So the choice of this song, I think, emphasizes the violence of prison and of the judiciary institution, especially in the US, perhaps in general as well. And Eight Hands sort of subversively returns the violence of the institution against those in power at the level of the state, so the people who are watching the play. This might not tell the whole story. It might be more complicated than that, because Atwood's jabs at the United States are not always one-sided. For example, in Surfacing, we're told about stupid Americans, I quote, okay, who turn out to actually be Canadians imitating Americans. So it might be more complex than that. So anyway, the author's musical allusion potentially turns the inmate, Eight Hands, into a torturer and a murderer. So, however light-hearted, this simple musical allusion certainly allows Atwood's text to resonate both with the Shakespearean intertext and its underlying violence. It also problematizes Felix's status, since he uses both the Shakespearean text and the inmates to achieve his revenge, mirroring both Prospero's manipulative mindset and Atwood's activity as the rewriter of such a canonical play as The Tempest. Sorry. Oops, I went back. I didn't do that on purpose. Sorry. Here is the end, not of the novel exactly, but let's say of the plot mostly. So that's Felix speaking to himself. What has he been thinking? Keeping her is Miranda, his daughter, tethered to him all this time, forcing her to do his bidding. How selfish he has been. Yes, he loves her. Miranda, I should say, the ghost of Miranda. Okay. Yes, he loves her, his dear one, his only child, but he knows what she truly wants and what he owes her. To the elements be free, he says to her. And finally, she is. So here at the end of the novel, it's not Felix, Prospero-like, who is said to be free, but rather Miranda, the ghost of his daughter, who can finally go as the mourning process has come to its conclusion. Hag-Seed is haunted by the ghost of Shakespeare and of his works. The novel affirms that the play is part of us, and therefore here to stay. Atwood acknowledges the presence of Shakespeare in her work and the fact that we cannot help but interact with those works. However ideologically loaded they might be. Like the convicts at Fletcher Correctional, however, authors and readers and stage directors and actors, etc., have the power to decide what they will make of it, how they will use its features and or its limitations to build the future from the remnants of the past. Part 5 is entitled This Thing of Darkness. So, Thing of Darkness is the way Prospero calls Caliban in The Tempest. And in this part, it's after the end of the play within the play, and Felix asks the inmates to imagine what happens after the end of The Tempest. In teams, each team being focused on one character. So it gives them some freedom of interpretation, the freedom to decide what they will do what they will make of the play. And in that sense, Hag-Seed does not restrict itself to imagining happy endings. Things can turn for the best or for the worst. The author has a social responsibility and can be well-intended, but knows that as one of those ambiguous magicians, they have no mastery upon what their text will mean to readers in the future. They can only hope that it will haunt them and give them the energy to go further. They are, after all, imperfect people with their woes, and they're human like their readers. So engaging in discussion with Shakespeare is for Felix a way of working through. For Atwood, it was a way of casting a look on her career, her early engagement with Canadian identity, but perhaps also a conduct through which she can wonder to what extent she's been Prospero-like. And perhaps a way also to affirm a belief in this consolatory power of literature. So this is arguably not a very political book, at least compared to other books by Atwood. This is probably partly determined by the Hogarth Shakespeare project itself, but it is not devoid of political implications. What it does to The Tempest is acknowledge its status perhaps as a cultural myth and a site of memory, while focusing on, if you like, the ethics of the transformative experience of writing.